Welcome to Sport Management Office Hours. My name is Professor Brandon Podgorski, Professor of Sport Leadership at Abilene Christian University. And as always, our co-host, Dr. Nick Zoroya, new Professor of Sport Management at Wayne State University. So that's very exciting. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that later in the show. But I'm really excited to have Dr. Nick Elam with us, Associate Professor at Ball State University. And Dr. Elam runs their education program, where he's in the School of Education and runs some things in their graduate program. But why we had him on the show today, one of the things that we like to do in this episode is one, kind of point out kind of really interesting things that are happening with sport management faculty. But I thought if you're a basketball fan and if you have kind of that itch in the summer, maybe you've watched the basketball tournament TBT and you're familiar with the Elam Ending. Well, we have got the guy with us, Mr. Elam Ending, Nick Elam, and so what I wanted to talk with him about, a lot of the things he does crossed over into the world of sport. So how can we as professors take something kind of theoretical, an idea we have, and put it into practice? So first, Dr. Elam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
And we're excited to have you. We got to know each other a little bit as we've done some kind of part-time stats work with the Pacers crew. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But I know this episode's going to be a little bit crunched for time, so we're going to jump right into it. Tell us about the Elam Ending. I remember watching the TBT for the past few years, and I'm like, this is great. Basketball continues. It's just not like the hack and the foul line and jacking up threes. Tell us about that. Walk us through how you first got that idea.
So the Elam ending in a nutshell is that you play most of a basketball game with a game clock and you play the last part of the game without a game clock. And the purpose is not to change basketball. In fact, it's meant to do the opposite, to preserve a more familiar style of play all the way through the end of the game. So the Elam ending has been implemented first at TBT, the basketball tournament, but since then it's also been implemented in the NBA All-Star Game and the NBA G League, the NBA Summer League, the top professional league in Canada, the Unrivaled, which is a new women's professional 3-on-3 league, the Women's College All-Star Game, and just countless grassroots level leagues and events it has grown to since that first implementation back in 2017.
So how did this kind of come to you? I mean, when you think about you're watching basketball and you've got a background in it, with the Elam Ending, but doing some stat work with the Pacers and the Fever. Were you just kind of watching basketball and kind of like, man, these Indians where people are just hacking and foul line and jacking up three, this is boring. There's got to be another way. Like, was that the problem you were trying to solve here?
So I'm a lifelong sports fan and a lifelong basketball fan and have been since I was about 5 years old. But yeah, it was pretty early on, probably earlier than it happens for most people, that my fandom shifted not beyond just rooting for certain players and teams to actually rooting for the sport themselves and actually thinking about ways that you could help a sport thrive or grow or be more exciting, more marketable, safer, whatever it might be, and kind of playing armchair commissioner. And so I was, let's see, this is 2007. I was a 24-year-old high school math teacher in Dayton, Ohio, and watching many basketball game, watching a basketball game like so many others that I had seen up to that point that just deteriorates at the end of the game, where you no longer see that athletic and fluid and suspenseful style of play at the end. And instead, you see the leading team is preoccupied with the clock because they're just trying to stall away the game and play very passively. The trailing team is also preoccupied with the clock. They're so desperate to stop the clock that they're willing to hand away free points to their opponent by fouling. When they're on defense, they have to force up ugly shots and rush their possessions when they're on offense. So this whole combination of factors, I realized, okay, these are all attributable to the clock. And the fact that you would reach a point in a game, a juncture of a game, where a trailing team's only recourse was to overtly and deliberately violate the rules of the sport by fouling, that to me was enough of a fundamental flaw that if you were to see that in a board game, a video game, a card game, or certainly a major sport, that's enough of a fundamental flaw to address. And you don't have to take my word for it. The NBA and the NCAA have tried to address the deliberate fouling strategy going back to the 1950s. They just haven't had a good solution for it. They've tried some things out that came and went, and to some extent, they've just decided, well, we're just going to live with it. We don't love it, but we're going to live with it. So, uh, my thought was, well, okay, all these different things are attributable to the clock in some way. So, what would happen if you were to get rid of the clock? How would that affect the game? And even at first, I thought, okay, there's must be some flaw, some reason why this wouldn't work. And so, just out of intellectual curiosity, I really started to scrutinize and explore the idea in the weeks and the months that followed in 2007, because I was trying to figure out, why won't this work? But as I really took a deep dive into it and tried to poke holes in it every which way I could, and couldn't really find what the flaw was, I really came to believe that, okay, I think this idea is necessary. I think it's sound. I think it has the potential to be very cool. And so, yeah, here we were in the summer of 2007. By that point, I had convinced myself that the idea had merit. And then what I didn't realize was that the really tough part lay ahead, which was to convince others in the basketball world that the idea had merit, because I was a total outsider, had no connections within the basketball world at that point.
So, what was that moment then when you realized, okay, hey, I need to go out and sell this, and then we'll kind of transition into kind of taking a theory and making it practical. But like, I think I've got something here. I think this will work. I've done the math. Now I want to go out and sell it. Like, when did that, like, did you finally get to the point where like, I've got the data, this is good?
Yeah, so when I first thought of the idea was March 10th, 2007. And again, taking a deep dive in a very skeptical way in the weeks and the months that followed. But yeah, by midsummer of 2007, I really thought that I had something, and I was trying to figure out, well, what's the best way to reach out to people. I didn't have, I tried to scrounge and find contact information for the best way I could, but I sent my work and my findings and my ideas to basically anyone I could in the basketball world or in the sports media world, just to try to generate discussion about the idea. So, I mean, really any, popular national talk show that you can think of. I was trying to reach out to people in that space. And then any conference commissioner, people in the NBA league office, WNBA league office. I mean, just anybody I could. And there were dozens and dozens of people that I reached out to, not knowing what kind of a response that I would get. But I mean, really, it was somebody later on compared it to, and I think this is a pretty good description. It compared it to just like shooting arrows into the sky, as many as I could and in as many directions as I could, hoping that at some point something would land.
So then thinking about now kind of transitioning. So we've got it, you're good with it. Now we're going out, we're trying to sell this. What was that like? Talk about kind of that process. One, it can just be hard to get your foot in the door. We talk about that with our students all the time, just trying to work in sport. But coming up with a theory where, hey, we're going to change the game. Like, how were you able to actually finally get audiences with people and then see this actually start to play out?
Yeah, so it was, one of the things that was really important, which I knew, was the messaging, which was, okay, I needed to make it clear eh, that I love basketball, that I'm not trying to bash the sport,
Yeah.
as something I can see as making a great sport even greater. Because here I am reaching out to people who have made their livelihood is in the sport. They live and they're immersed in the sport, so they don't want to hear from some outsider who's just bashing the sport. So I had to make it clear that I love basketball, and I want to make a great sport even greater. Also needed to make sure that I was making it clear that I was knowledgeable without being a know-it-all, because if you try to sound like you know more than the people who are immersed in the sport, that's going to turn people off too. So it was, yeah, finding that good balance of being knowledgeable but not being a know-it-all, being critical of the sport but making it clear that it's from a good place that wants the sport to improve. And then also, how do I share the idea in a succinct but clear and thorough way, and what are all the different benefits to it? Have I already anticipated, the different effects of it, to make it clear that I've done a thorough effort here. So when I reached out to people, I mean, 95+% of the time I didn't get any response at all. And most of the times when somebody did reply, it was just sort of kind of politely thanking me for my outreach, but saying that it wasn't a good fit at this time. Um, and then every now and then there'd be a few people who would be outspoken and saying that they didn't like the idea, which I appreciated. I appreciated their honesty, but their criticism was always just a matter of taste. You know, they didn't feel like there was enough of an issue to address it in the sport currently, or they just kind of didn't like the idea, but they couldn't point to necessarily a fundamental flaw of why it wouldn't work. And so as as I continue to reach out to people, even when people didn't like it, in a way, it kind of emboldened me more because if they had just told me why it wouldn't work, then I would have said, okay, that's great. I'm glad you told me that, and I would have moved on to something else, or just moved away from it. But even the people who didn't like it couldn't tell me why it wouldn't work, and that was again kind of emboldening in a way that I didn't quite see the dead end to this project yet. And so I thought I'm just going to keep reaching out to people until I find that one connection, that one breakthrough, which I always felt was just one day away. Even though it ended up taking 10 years from 2007 to 2017 when it was first implemented at TBT, the basketball tournament. Again, it was 10 years worth of tomorrows thinking, okay, tomorrow's going to be the day. Tomorrow's going to be the time that I make that connection, that breakthrough. If I had known that it was going to be 10 years initially, I don't know if I would have stuck with it, but it never felt like 10 years because, again, it always felt like the big breakthrough was one day away.
And so you got your big breakthrough at TBT. Can you kind of quickly recap, what sold them on it? What led to that opportunity and then actually embracing
Yeah, so I've learned from this that I think the best innovations, whether it's sports or otherwise, is something that is practical and cool. Now, I love this idea from the practical side. I loved that there was a flaw in the sport. Again, you've got a team that has to break the rule of the sport to give it any chance of winning. That is a flaw. And I love that this gave them another option where they could just continue to play real basketball and have a chance to win the game and have a better chance of winning the game. So I loved it from the practical side that there was an issue that it addressed that. What TBT loved about it, they liked the practical side of it, but what they loved was the cool side of it. They loved this thought of games ending on a made basket. Every game ends with the swish of a net. So, and they love the potential for the great highlights and the images, the suspense that leads up to that, which certainly I love that too. And that was something that was exciting to me right from the beginning of this whole journey. But for them, that was really the selling point, was having these great images and highlights that can live on. And certainly TBT has had an overwhelming share of those. And I think for them, especially just the unique format of TBT, knowing that a winner take all $1 million game is going to come down to someone putting the ball through the net, whether it's in a 1 point game or a 20 point game, there's still a lot of juice to it. And I can attest that that is true, having seen and attended so many of these games.
That's awesome. And how does it feel now? So TBT kind of has taken off over the last few years, and I've been familiar with it since the beginning. How does it feel now to have the Elam Ending kind of bleed into other sports? Like, for example, I know that the Premier Lacrosse League, completely different from basketball, borrowed it for one of their exhibition games. So what is it like to see it kind of bleed into sports that you never really intended it to have an impact on?
Yeah, I think it's cool in a way. And that was also something that I considered early on was well, how would this work in other sports, and how well it would work in other sports. The reason I think that it's a best fit for basketball is because the scoring rate in if you look at basketball compared to other time-based sports, and when I say time-based sports, I'm talking about things like American football, soccer, ice hockey, field hockey, lacrosse, water polo, you go way down the line. The scoring rates in all those other sports are relatively low when you compare it to the scoring rate in basketball. Now, that was not always the case in basketball. When James Naismith first invented the sport in the late 1800s, and the first couple decades after that, that scoring rates in basketball were very low. And he was right to govern basketball by time, because when there's a very low scoring rate, or there's not some other fundamental accomplishment like outs in baseball that can be used in place of a clock, you really do need a clock. And all these sports that use a clock, you need it. But basketball for many, many years has had a scoring rate that's clearly distinct, much higher than all these other sports, where you can realistically use points instead of a clock. And so really the concept of a clock in basketball is just, it's kind of outdated at this point. It made sense in the beginning, but now that the scoring rate's so high, you don't need a clock anymore for the whole game. You can use points instead of clock. So these other sports, there's a way that you can kind of make them work, but you have to, I know that's been tried like in soccer, but you have to change so much of the sport. Like for soccer, to make it work in soccer, you have to have a smaller field, fewer players, bigger size goal, that sort of thing, just to ensure that there's going to be some scoring. And so I think that's true for other sports too. Whereas in basketball, and the reason that I love it for basketball, you can keep everything else the same in basketball. And you can just plug this format in, and boom, it works. And it provides us with what I call more authentic basketball. It looks more like real basketball than what we get with the time format.
Yeah, and just to finish that off, I completely agree. I think the one thing that it does help with some of those time-based sports is the idea of taking the air out of the ball, because it doesn't really matter how slow you play. Like, we are not leaving here until a score is reached. So, for example, I'm a lacrosse guy, when I think about that, I'm like, okay, sure, the team is up by 3. We could just wait till the clock runs out, but wouldn't it be more exciting if they were incentivized to keep scoring? And so that does kind of, it handles a pace issue, I think, especially for the end of games.
Yeah, and certainly, it takes away all the incentive to stall once the clock is gone, for sure. But even it takes away a lot of the incentive to stall even when the clock is still around, because you don't want to totally take away all of your assertiveness and your flow to your offense, and knowing that you're going to have to ramp it back up again. So yeah, it has benefits that extend even that begin even before the untimed portion of the game begins. Exactly.
So we've talked about what the Elam Ending is and how you created that. We've talked about, how you went out and you were actually able to sell it and we were kind of putting it into practice. Now I'm kind of interested thinking about other faculty, other college professors who may have these ideas, in theory, that they want to go out and they want to sell and they want to actually see in practice. If you had to give advice, what could other faculty learn from the process that you went through with the Elam Ending?
Yeah, and the insights that I have to share are not necessarily because I did everything right. In fact, I think I've learned some lessons about maybe things I could have done differently, because whatever I was doing, it took 10 years for it to click. So there's probably a better way that I could have done it. I think one thing, whether this is someone in academia or totally separate from academia, but if they want to bring a concept to life, they really need to look at, well, how much of this can I possibly move forward and get off the ground on my own? And then how much of that do I truly need to, have the buy-in of someone else who might be more established in the field somehow. So for me, again, that big breakthrough was connecting with TBT, and it was a good fit for them. They were already an established event, but they also like to see themselves as trendsetters. So they were always kind of pushing the envelope, and they were a good fit for that. But again, the downside was that it took 10 years of reaching out to different people before finding that connection. And I look back at sometimes and I wonder, well, if I had just decided in 2007, maybe the best way forward would have been for me to just start a league myself somehow and have this implemented and get some eyes on this format. It was something that crossed my mind at times, but it seemed maybe a little more daunting than what it really was. And again, I had this thought in my head that I'm really just one day away from connecting with somebody who's already established in the field. They didn't know that. So to bring it back to your question, yeah, you really, whatever field you're in, whatever type of innovation that you have that you want to see come to life, think about, sure, yeah, it is great if you're able to connect with somebody who already has the means and the establishment kind of to bring it off the ground. But don't underestimate or don't overlook possible ways that you might be able to move it forward yourself. Think about all the different, strengths that you have uh, and the passion that you have for the idea. You're going to be more passionate about it than probably anybody else is. So that's something that's hard to match or quantify when you're looking elsewhere. But really think about all the different ways that you can move it forward yourself before you have to lean on a connection beyond what you're able to do.
Yeah. When you were creating the Elam Ending and actually going through the work of looking at games, coming up with the data, were you getting any help from maybe not? I don't. Were you at Ball State at the time as you were doing this?
Well, what's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah, I during the whole time that I was getting this idea off the ground, that was
Mhm.
during the time that I was a teacher when I first thought of this
Okay.
idea, and then later on a school principal. So when you're in those jobs, your days are pretty packed. So like all this was done during free time, basically evenings, weekends, whatever. And I made a promise to myself, and I kept this promise that I was not going to let this uh, pursuit take away from any family time, friend time, social time, anything like that. I found a good way to compartmentalize the time. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't. None of this was happening during work days necessarily, but it was 2017 was a big year for me because that was one when Elam Ending was first implemented at TBT in June.
Mhm.
Just before that, in May, was when I completed my PhD at Miami University. And then just after that, in August, is when I moved to Indiana because I had my job waiting for me at Ball State University. So that spring and summer of 2017 was truly life changing for me. But yeah, the idea had already debuted and had just debuted before I started at Ball State.
Excellent. So thinking about the future then, it's one thing to get this up off the ground, and that is such a heavy lift. I haven't done what you've done, but being a past entrepreneur, I mean, just getting to the point where we get things open and we start making money just takes so long. I can imagine the same process is true when you're trying to take something theoretical and actually kind of put it into practice. But then we want to kind of scale it from there. So what's your plan now? Are you good where you're at? I know you've had tried to chip away and get in with the NBA. Do you want to see this continue to grow?
Absolutely. And one thing that's nice about this is, and this is what part of what makes that first 10 years seem like a lifetime ago, like such a distant memory, is it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it now that I'm so far removed from that first 10-year span that during that entire time, the only way I could see this concept was in my mind and on paper, and I was trying to convey that vision to other people in the basketball world, just trying to get them to envision it in their own mind. But now that the idea has been implemented and there are these highlights and there's footage and you can find anywhere of these games, it's made my job so much easier because now the concept can speak for itself rather than me speaking on its behalf. And it's a real thing now. So people, even if either they know what it is right offhand by hearing the term eliminating, or they can easily look it up and get a feel for what it is. So that's made it easier to grow. And yeah, I absolutely, the fact that NBA is experimenting with this in the G League level is really a big deal. They've done that for 3 years. So I could definitely see this moving into like an overtime only format for
Mhm.
the NBA or the WNBA. I think those are great fits. And then I've even though the NCAA is very slow to change on different things, there's still all these different postseason tournaments other than the NCAA tournament. There's the NIT, there's now the new Crown tournament, the CBI, the CIT, all these postseason tournaments that seem just like a tailor-made to experiment with different rules, which they've done before, but they haven't experimented with the Elam Ending. I think those are also perfect fits for this concept too. So I've learned to be patient with this project over the years, and I'll continue to be patient with it. But yeah, I think it has forward momentum still for sure.
Well, I think one of the coolest things about it, it's going to continue to evolve. Like, we talked about this a few weeks ago when we were out. It went from 7 points to 8 points, and you're just going to continue to get all this data. And I just see something, this is cool. I know you're kind of in the school of education, but if you wanted students to participate in research on this, there's great opportunities for that as well, which I think is just a really cool idea.
Yeah, and it's been cool for me to hear from different instructors of courses to say that they've had a project, a course project related to the Elam Ending, or students writing papers about it. That kind of thing is just very, very, very cool to me.
Well, I know all of us has just started the fall semester. We're all kind of running around like chickens with our head cut off right now. So I know we're going to cut it short a little bit today. But Dr. Elam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is a lot of fun.